I'm a single mother in my early 30s, and I thought I had learned to live with disappointment. But nothing prepared me for the text that shattered something inside me. "We're skipping your son's birthday. Things are tough." I said no problem, pretending it didn't hurt. But 7 days later, my entire world tilted. Because on Christmas morning, while my boy sipped hot chocolate beside me, we saw their posts, expensive gifts, balloons, a celebration overflowing with money, all for my sister's kids. And my son, my quiet, gentle child, whispered, "Did they forget me again?" That whisper made me take one silent step that would flip my entire family upside down. And the very next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., my father showed up banging on my door, screaming like a man whose world was collapsing. Before I tell you what he said, if you've ever felt ignored or betrayed by your own family, subscribe now. Don't risk missing stories that expose exactly how this happens behind closed doors. And if you still don't want to subscribe, tell me in the comments why. You want to know when I first realized I was invisible to them? It wasn't Christmas. It wasn't that text message. It started decades before my son was even born. I was always the responsible one. The one who cleaned up after family gatherings while my sister posed for photos. The one who drove my parents to appointments while she was too busy with her perfect life. The one who remembered everyone's birthdays, everyone's anniversaries, everyone's favorite meals, while they couldn't even remember what grade my son was in. My sister? She was the cherished one, the golden child who could do no wrong. She married young, had 3 beautiful children, and became the center of every family conversation. Her kids got the best gifts. Her achievements were celebrated like national holidays. Her problems became everyone's emergencies. And me, I became the afterthought, the backup plan, the one they called when they needed something fixed, but forgot when it was time to celebrate. Do you know what it feels like to watch your entire family orbit around someone else's life while yours gets smaller and smaller? To become so accustomed to being second that you stop expecting first? I do. I lived it for years. Every holiday was the same painful pattern. Thanksgiving at my parents' house meant watching them fawn over my sister's family while I served the turkey. Christmas meant expensive gifts piled high for her children, while my son got a $20 gift card and a pat on the head. Easter, 4th of July, Labor Day, it didn't matter. The script never changed. But birthdays were the worst. 2 years before that Christmas morning, I decided to host a small birthday party for my son. He was turning 6. I saved for weeks to afford decorations, a cake from the good bakery, and enough food for the whole family. I sent invitations 3 weeks in advance. I called to remind everyone. I did everything right. They said they'd be there at 2 o'clock. The cake was ready. The decorations were perfect. My son wore his favorite shirt and stood by the window, watching for their cars. 2 o'clock came and went. No one. 2:30. Nothing. At 3:15 they finally arrived, my parents, my sister, her husband, their kids. No apology. No explanation. Just casual lateness like it didn't matter. Like my son's face hadn't fallen with every passing minute. They stayed for 40 minutes. 40 minutes. They ate cake, took a few photos, and then my sister checked her phone and announced they had dinner reservations. For her daughter's friend's birthday party. A party that was apparently more important than my son's. And they left. All of them. Following her out the door like she was the Pied Piper, and they had no choice but to follow. I stood in my living room surrounded by untouched decorations and half-eaten cake, watching my son try to smile while tears built behind his eyes. He was 6 years old, and he already knew he wasn't enough for them. I told him I needed to use the bathroom. I locked the door quietly, gripped the sink, and stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked back at me with hollow eyes, a woman who had spent her entire life accepting crumbs and calling it love. I could hear my son in the living room, playing with the one toy my parents had brought him. Playing alone. On his birthday. While I hid in the bathroom trying not to scream. That's when I remembered something my grandmother told me before she died. She was the only one who ever really saw me. The only one who noticed when I went silent at family dinners, or when I forced smiles through the pain. She pulled me aside one afternoon when I was 19 and said, "Baby, if they forget you today, don't give them the power to define your whole life. You're worth more than their attention. You always have been." I didn't understand it then. I was still young, still hoping that if I just tried harder, loved better, sacrificed more, they'd finally see me. But standing in that bathroom, listening to my son play alone on his birthday, I finally understood. They would never see me. Because they didn't want to. Because seeing me would require them to acknowledge their neglect, their favoritism, their cruelty disguised as family dynamics. And in that moment, staring at my tired reflection, I made a vow. A silent, furious, unbreakable vow. I would not raise my son in a world where he believed he deserved crumbs. I would not teach him that love meant accepting less. I would not let him grow up thinking he was invisible just because I had accepted my own invisibility for too long. If you've ever had to pretend something didn't hurt, hit the like button. It tells YouTube this story matters. I was done pretending. I was done accepting. I was done being the forgotten one. But I didn't know how to change it yet. I just knew I had to try. The night after that Christmas morning, after seeing their posts, after my son's whisper, after the rage finally cracked through my resignation, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to my son breathe softly in the next room, and I realized something terrifying. I had no plan. I had anger, I had pain, I had determination, but I had no actual way out. I was barely making ends meet. I worked a job that paid just enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. I had no savings, no degree, no safety net. I was trapped in a life where I needed my family's occasional help just to survive, and they knew it. That's why they could treat me this way, because I had no choice but to stay. So I decided that if I was going to protect my son, if I was going to build a life where he never had to whisper, "Did they forget me again?" then I needed to do something I'd never done before. I needed to bet on myself. That night at 1 a.m, I opened my cracked laptop, the one I'd bought secondhand 3 years earlier, and I started researching. I didn't even know what I was looking for at first. Just something. Anything. A way to make more money without another degree I couldn't afford, or another job that would steal time from my son. I stumbled across digital skills. Freelancing. Remote work. People were making actual money writing, designing, managing social media for businesses. It sounded impossible. It sounded like something other people did. People with connections, with confidence, with luck I'd never had. But what choice did I have? I started learning at night after my son went to sleep. I'd put him to bed at 8, clean the kitchen, and then sit down at that dying laptop and teach myself skills I didn't even know existed a week earlier. I took free courses. I watched tutorials until my eyes burned. I practiced writing, designing, strategizing, anything that might make me valuable to someone willing to pay. And I failed. Over and over again. My first 5 clients didn't pay me. They took my work and ghosted me. One told me my writing was amateur. Another said I wasn't professional enough. I applied to 47 jobs in 2 months and got 3 responses. All rejections. There were nights I wanted to quit. Nights I sat at that laptop at 2 a.m, exhausted and humiliated, wondering if I was delusional to think I could build something from nothing. But then I'd remember my son's face. I'd remember that whisper. I'd remember standing in that bathroom on his birthday, broken and powerless. And I'd keep going. 3 months in, something shifted. A client I'd worked with for free referred me to someone who actually paid well. Really well. Enough that I could breathe a little easier that month. That one client led to another. And another. Word spread that I was reliable, that I delivered quality work, that I cared about results. Slowly, painfully slowly, I started building something. A small service business. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would make headlines. Just steady work that paid more than my old job ever did. I reinvested every extra dollar into learning more, getting better, building systems that could scale. I stopped attending family events. I told them I was busy, which was true, but it was more than that. Every time I sat at their table, watching them dote on my sister's family while barely acknowledging mine, I felt my energy drain. I felt myself shrinking back into that invisible version of myself. So I chose peace over obligation. I chose my son over their expectations. I chose myself over their comfort. They didn't notice at first. Or maybe they did and didn't care. Either way, no one called to ask why I'd stopped coming. No one checked if I was okay. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. Months passed. My business grew. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life, but this time, I was working for me. For my son. For the future we deserved. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't tell anyone what I was building. I stayed quiet, stayed focused, stayed patient. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that people who forget you when you're struggling will suddenly remember you exist the moment they need something. Most families don't notice when you're fading out of their lives until they need something. Subscribe now. Don't miss what happens when they finally did. 18 months after that Christmas morning, I signed a lease on a new home. Not a mansion. Not a palace. Just a clean, safe, beautiful space in a neighborhood with good schools and parks where my son could ride his bike without me holding my breath. It had 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for him, and one that I turned into an office where I could finally work without sitting on my bed with a dying laptop balanced on my knees. The day we moved in, my son ran through every room, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. He picked his bedroom, decorated it with posters and drawings, and that night he hugged me so tight, I thought my ribs might crack. "Mom," he whispered into my shoulder. "Is this really ours?" "Yes, baby," I whispered back, tears burning my eyes. "This is really ours. I didn't just move us into a better home. I invested in my son's growth in every way I'd never been able to before. I bought him books, shelves full of them. Fantasy, science fiction, history, poetry. Whatever he wanted to read, I got for him. I enrolled him in hobbies he'd always wanted to try, but we couldn't afford. Piano lessons, soccer, art classes. I got him into therapy with a counselor who specialized in children dealing with family neglect. Because I knew that no matter how much I loved him, I couldn't erase the damage of being forgotten by people who were supposed to cherish him. I watched him grow more confident every day. Watched him make friends, excel in school, smile without that haunted edge I'd seen in his eyes for so long. And me? I kept building. My business scaled naturally, not because I got lucky, but because I'd put in the work when no one was watching. I hired help. I streamlined systems. I turned what started as desperation into something sustainable. But I stayed silent. I didn't post about my success. Didn't brag. Didn't announce anything. My family had no idea. They still assumed I was struggling, still barely surviving, still the same forgotten daughter and sister I'd always been. They never checked. Not once. No one called to ask how I was doing. No one visited to see if I needed help. No one even bothered to wonder why I'd stopped showing up. And honestly, that silence was freeing. Because it confirmed what I'd always suspected. They'd never cared about me. They'd cared about having someone to look down on. Someone who made them feel generous and important and needed. I wasn't any of those things anymore. And they had no idea. I began to feel this strange, powerful calm settling into my bones. Not happiness exactly. There was still too much pain for that. But something close to peace. Because I knew a moment was coming. I knew that eventually, their perfect little world would crack. And when it did, they'd reach for me, expecting me to be right where they left me, waiting like a loyal dog to be useful again. But I wouldn't be there. Not anymore. If you've ever outgrown people who once underestimated you, comment I rise. I didn't know exactly when that moment would come. I just knew it would. And I was right. It started with a phone call I didn't answer. My mother. 3 times in one afternoon. I stared at my phone, watching her name flash on the screen, and felt nothing. No guilt. No curiosity. Just a quiet certainty that whatever she wanted, it wasn't about me. She left a voicemail. I deleted it without listening. Then my father called. Twice. Then my sister. I blocked all of them and went back to work. I found out later, through a mutual cousin who still spoke to me, what had happened. My sister's perfect life had collapsed. Years of overspending, of keeping up appearances, of buying things she couldn't afford to impress people who didn't care. It had all caught up with her. She was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out. Behind on her mortgage. Her kids' private school tuition was overdue, and the school had sent letters threatening expulsion. The money they'd flaunted on social media? The expensive gifts, the lavish celebrations, the designer clothes? All of it was borrowed. All of it was fake. And now the bill had come due. My parents panicked. They'd tied their own self-worth to my sister's image of success. They'd spent years propping her up, funding her lifestyle, boasting about her to anyone who'd listen. They'd built their entire identity around her. And now she was falling apart. So they did what people like them always do. They looked for someone to fix it. They looked for me. They called expecting me to answer. Expecting me to drop everything and save them like I always had before. Expecting me to be the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who'd sacrifice herself so they could keep pretending everything was fine. But I didn't answer. Not out of spite, though God knows I had every right. I didn't answer because I finally understood something crucial. Helping them wouldn't help me. It wouldn't help my son. It would only teach him that love means letting people use you until there's nothing left. When I blocked their numbers, something shifted in their world. For the first time in their lives, they experienced real fear. Not fear of consequences, they'd avoided those forever. Fear of losing their scapegoat. Fear of being stuck with a problem they couldn't dump on someone else. 3 days after I blocked them, my father showed up at my door. I heard him before I saw him. Pounding. Screaming. Demanding I let him in like he had some God-given right to my home, my time, my help. His voice was raw with rage. Not because he was worried about me, but because I'd dared to say no. Because I'd stopped playing my role. Because I'd had the audacity to put myself and my son first. Some people only love you when they need you. If you agree, like this video so more people see it. I stood on the other side of that door, listening to him bang and shout, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Power. Not power over him, I didn't want that. Power over myself. Over my choices. Over my life. I waited until he tired himself out. Until the pounding slowed. Until his voice cracked. Then I opened the door. I opened the door slowly, calmly, and looked at my father, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He was smaller than I remembered. Older. His face was red from shouting, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild with desperation and fury. He pushed past me into my home without asking permission, still muttering about disrespect and family obligations, and how dare I ignore them when they needed me. But then he stopped. He stopped and looked around, at the clean floors, the organized space, the furniture that wasn't secondhand garbage, the light streaming through windows in a neighborhood he didn't know I could afford. He looked at me, at my calm expression, my straight posture, my complete lack of fear. And I watched realization dawn on his face. I wasn't struggling anymore. I wasn't dependent. I wasn't the person he thought I was. I gestured to the dining table. Sit. He sat. Not because I asked nicely, but because for the first time in our relationship, I wasn't asking. I was telling. I sat across from him, folded my hands, and waited. He started with anger. Accusations. How could I abandon family? How could I be so selfish? Didn't I know they were in trouble? I let him talk. Let him exhaust himself. When he finally ran out of steam, I spoke, and my voice was steady and cold and absolutely clear. You skipped my son's birthday because things were tough, I said. Do you remember that? He blinked. Confused. What? 2 years ago. You texted me the morning of his birthday and said you couldn't come because things were tough. I don't. 7 days later, you threw a party for my sister's kids. Expensive gifts. Decorations. Everything you said you couldn't afford for my son. His face shifted. Not with guilt, not yet. With discomfort. On Christmas morning, I continued, my voice hardening, while my son sat next to me drinking hot chocolate, we saw your posts. All of you. Celebrating. Spending money. Spoiling my sister's children like royalty. That's different. And my son, I interrupted. My quiet, gentle child looked at me and whispered, Did they forget me again? The words hung in the air like a blade. My father opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. We didn't mean. Yes, you did. My voice was sharp now, cutting through his excuses like paper. You meant every bit of it. Every forgotten birthday. Every canceled visit. Every time you chose her over me. Every time you made my son feel like he wasn't enough. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said. I understand that you built your entire life around my sister because it made you look good. Because her success made you feel successful. Because loving her was easy and loving me required effort. He flinched. I understand, I continued, that you only remembered I existed when you needed something. When you wanted someone to clean up or organize or sacrifice or fix your problems. I was useful. Never loved. Just useful. That's not true. Then where were you? My voice rose for the first time, sharp and raw. Where were you when I was struggling to feed my son? Where were you when I was working 2 jobs and falling apart? Where were you for any of it? Silence. You weren't there, I answered for him. Because you didn't care. You care now that you need money, now that your golden child failed, now that you've run out of options. But you didn't care when it mattered. His face crumbled. Not with love or remorse, with shame. The shame of being caught. The shame of having his neglect thrown back in his face, so plainly he couldn't deny it. I'm sorry, he whispered. But I heard the fear underneath. This wasn't an apology rooted in love or regret. This was panic. This was a man realizing he'd lost his safety net and scrambling to get it back. She never saw the danger coming, and most people don't. Subscribe now so you're never blindsided like she was. I sat back in my chair and looked at him. This man who'd raised me, who was supposed to protect me, who'd failed me in every way that mattered. And I felt nothing. No anger. No love. Just exhaustion and clarity. You're not sorry, I said quietly. You're scared. He didn't deny it. My father sat across from me, broken and small, waiting for me to save him. And for one brief moment, I almost did. Not because I wanted to, but because 30 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. 30 years of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who fixes everything. It's a hard instinct to kill. But then I thought about my son. I thought about the life I'd built for him. The life I'd bled and fought and sacrificed to create. A life where he knew his worth. Where he didn't have to beg for love. Where he never had to whisper, "Did they forget me again?" And I knew exactly what I had to do. "I'm not giving you money," I said. My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and then anger. "You'd let your own family suffer?" "Let me be very clear," I said, and my voice was iron. "I will not become your savior. I will not rescue you from consequences you spent years creating. I will not teach my son that love means letting people drain you until there's nothing left. But we're family." "Family?" I laughed, and it was bitter and sharp and years in the making. "You don't get to use that word now. You don't get to call me family after years of treating me like I didn't exist. We made mistakes. You made choices," I corrected. "Choices to prioritize her. Choices to ignore me. Choices to treat my son like he was invisible. Those weren't mistakes. Those were decisions you made every single day for years." He tried to speak, but I kept going, letting everything I'd held back for decades pour out. "I spent my entire life waiting for you to see me. Waiting for you to love me the way you loved her. Waiting for you to choose me just once. And you never did. Not once. Not ever. That's not. Do you know what it did to me?" My voice cracked, and I hated it, hated showing him that he still had the power to hurt me. "Do you know what it feels like to grow up knowing you're not enough? To watch your own parents celebrate someone else's children while yours gets forgotten?" He looked away. "I survived it," I continued. "I survived you. But I will not let my son survive the same thing. I will not expose him to people who taught me that my value was measured by my usefulness." "So you're just going to abandon us?" "No," I said. "You abandoned me. Years ago. I'm just finally accepting it." I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. A clear signal that this conversation was over. "I'll give you one thing," I said. "And only one thing." He looked up, desperate hope flickering in his eyes. "Boundaries," I finished. "You want a relationship with me? With my son? Then you earn it. You show up consistently. You treat us with respect. You acknowledge what you did and work to repair it, not with words but with action. Years of action. That's not fair." "Fair?" I almost laughed. Nothing about this has ever been fair. But I'm not interested in fairness anymore. I'm interested in protecting my son. I held the door open wider. "I will not let my son depend on people who forget him," I said quietly. "I will not raise him to believe that family means accepting crumbs and calling it love. I will not teach him to sacrifice himself for people who wouldn't cross the street for him." My father stood slowly, his movements heavy with defeat. He walked to the door, paused, looked at me one more time, really looked at me, and I saw it. The moment he understood. The door had closed. Not in anger. Not in vengeance. But in maturity. In self-preservation. In love for my son that was stronger than any loyalty I'd ever felt toward people who'd never earned it. He left without another word. I closed the door behind him, locked it, and stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of 30 years lift off my shoulders. What would you have done in her place? Tell me in the comments, guilty or not guilty. I wasn't guilty. I wasn't cruel. I was just finally done. That night, after my father left, I sat in my son's room and watched him sleep. His face was peaceful, innocent, completely unaware of the confrontation that had happened downstairs. Unaware that I'd just severed ties with people who'd spent years making us both feel small. I thought about the journey, the long, exhausting, painful journey from that bathroom on his 6th birthday to this moment. I thought about the woman I'd been. The woman who accepted neglect and called it normal. The woman who swallowed her pain and smiled through family gatherings while her heart shattered quietly in her chest. I thought about the text message that broke me. The Christmas posts that exposed their cruelty. The whisper that changed everything. Did they forget me again? For words. For simple, devastating words that ripped through every excuse I'd ever made for them. I thought about the nights I spent learning new skills on a dying laptop, exhausted and terrified and completely unsure if any of it would work. I thought about the failures, the rejection, the moments I wanted to quit. I thought about the slow, painful climb out of invisibility, the business I built, the home I created, the life I gave my son, a life where he didn't have to earn love or prove his worth or wonder why he wasn't enough. And I thought about my father's face when he realized I didn't need him anymore. When he understood that I'd grown beyond his neglect. That I'd become someone he couldn't use or control or forget. I felt no satisfaction in his pain. No triumph in his defeat. Just a quiet, steady certainty that I'd made the right choice. Because this was never about revenge. It was never about hurting them the way they hurt me. It was about breaking a cycle. About refusing to pass down the belief that love is earned through suffering. About teaching my son that his worth isn't determined by people too broken to see it. My grandmother's words came back to me, clearer now than they'd ever been. If they forget you today, don't give them the power to define your whole life. I'd given them that power for too long. I'd let their neglect shape me, diminish me, convince me I was less than I was. But not anymore. I leaned down and kissed my son's forehead, feeling a swell of fierce, protective love. He would never feel invisible. He would never whisper those 4 devastating words. He would never grow up believing he had to accept crumbs. Because I'd made sure of it. Because I'd fought for it. Because I'd loved him enough to walk away from people who only knew how to take. I straightened up, looked at his sleeping face one more time, and whispered into the quiet darkness. You are enough. You have always been enough. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it. I left his room, closed the door softly, and walked downstairs to the life I'd built. The life I'd earned. The life no one could take from me. And I realized something profound. Sometimes, the people who forget you are the reason you finally remember yourself. They forget your birthday, and you remember your strength. They overlook your pain, and you remember your resilience. They treat you like you don't matter, and you remember that you've always mattered. You just needed to stop waiting for them to see it. Their neglect became my fuel. Their dismissal became my freedom. Their cruelty became the catalyst for the most important transformation of my life. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their acknowledgement. I didn't need them to finally see what they'd done. I just needed to see myself clearly, to remember who I was beneath all the years of being forgotten. And once I remembered, once I truly saw myself, everything changed. I became the mother my son deserved. The woman my grandmother always knew I could be. The person I'd been all along, just buried under years of believing I wasn't enough. So if you're watching this, if you've ever felt forgotten or invisible or less than, know this. Their blindness is not your truth. Their neglect is not your value. Their inability to love you properly is not evidence that you're unlovable. Sometimes you have to walk away from the people who should have loved you best. Sometimes you have to close doors you thought would break you to open. Sometimes you have to let them go so you can finally remember yourself. And when you do, when you finally step into the life you deserve, you'll realize that being forgotten by them was the greatest gift they ever gave you. Because it forced you to remember yourself. If this story moved you, subscribe before the next twist catches you off guard.